Well, good evening, Jennifer, and welcome everybody to Environmental Coffee House. It's good to see you all in the chat. And Kim, I just want to say thank you for being here. I know your back is really bad, and we really love you and care about you and hope you get better soon. And you did not have to do this. So just know. So, what's going on, Jen?
Well, I think we have a dynamite show for tonight, Sandy. It's going to be so interesting. Our first article is going to be from Discourse, and it's called White Noise and Climate Anxiety Experts' Addiction to Inaccurate Visions of Climate Catastrophe Are Creating Major Climate Anxiety. Can we overcome this noise? Okay.
Right.
And then I believe you are going to do a little retrospective on Alex
The
Trembath,
author. Mm-hmm.
the author.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have an intermission video of
Oh,
some
yes.
sort.
And we're doing a little something different tonight. We have little chapter head videos for our articles. So
Oh,
you'll like
yes. Very
that.
exciting.
Yeah, you guys will like that.
It's fun. Fun stuff. And then we're going to run over and have one of our very favorite authors, Umair Haig, Life During the Age of Extinction and How It'll Change, what it's going to feel like as the planet turns against us. This just out 2 days ago. So this is going to be a dynamite show, Sandy. I'm so excited about
Yeah,
it.
me too. So I suppose we'll get started with chapter one. Okay, so there is our header for the evening of the first part of the evening of hopium. I mean, not my favorite word, but we're going to talk about this guy, Alex, from the Breakthrough. The Breakthrough Institute, and he's an author. He's the deputy director, and at the Breakthrough, he is the lead or the co-author of several of their publications. And let me make sure that this is straight. Okay, and basically, he is an eco-modernist. He graduated from Berkeley, and he got a bachelor's in environmental economics and policy, and he is on Twitter. What they are about really is eco-modernism, the environmental philosophy that argues that humans can protect nature and improve human well-being by decoupling human development from environmental impacts. So let's take it away with the discourse. And I'm going to start with white noise and climate anxiety. So buckle up, see how we like him. Quote, we're suffering from brain fade. We need an occasional catastrophe to break up the incessant bombardment of information. White Noise by Don DeLillo. Even experts on the subject could be forgiven for holding mistaken view that natural disasters have gotten significantly more frequent, intense, and deadly as a result of climate change. Weather-related disasters skyrocketed fivefold over the past 50 years, reads a canonical climate headline from this past year. Deadly Indian heat wave made 30 times more likely by climate crisis, reads another. We are in a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator, said United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres at November's annual climate negotiations. But these claims are more like Chicken Little-ism than the truth, according to him. In reality, the frequency of natural disasters has not increased globally. According to the Center for Research on the Epidemiology of Disasters, CRED, the fivefold increase cited in the headline above is mostly a statistical artifact of improved reporting of natural disasters over the decades. CRED maintains the Emergency Events Database, MDAT, tracking disasters, which actually shows a decline in the frequency of extreme weather and climate events over the last 20 years, a robust trend that its authors have had trouble communicating to the public. Even today, we have people quoting us saying that MDAT database shows that disasters are increasing in an alarming way. It's not increasing in an alarming way, says CRED researcher Debarati Guha Sapir. We said at our press conference that there's not been an increase. Nobody wants good news. Meanwhile, the intensity of some weather and climate extremes has increased, but attribution studies and science communicators use metrics deliberately designed to exaggerate the effect. As climate scientist Patrick Brown, my colleague at the Breakthrough Institute, wrote in August, the same analysis that yielded the 30 times more likely result for the India-Pakistan heat wave also concluded that climate change made the heat wave 1C hotter than it would have been in pre-industrial climate. And the disasters that do occur kill many fewer people than they used to, thanks to protection provided by modern wealth and infrastructure. Annual deaths attributed to natural disasters have fallen by over 90% in the last century, even as the world's population has increased from under 2 billion to now 8 billion people. In recent decades, as the reality of global climate change has become more obvious, vulnerability has continued to decline. Recent research suggests that the global average morality from climate relation, I think he meant mortality, don't you think?
I think I do.
Yeah, I think they meant.
I do. I think it's a typo or who knows.
Yeah,
It
something.
doesn't make sense. Yeah.
No, because morality. We could go into a whole other show with
Mortality,
that.
I think,
From climate related hazards declined by a factor of 5 between the 1980s and the present, even as carbon emissions nearly doubled globally. If there's one question I get more than any other, it's, quote, are we doomed? Unquote. And when I raffle off a version of the above observations that climate risk is real but not existential, that some weather and climate extremes are getting worse but not beyond our ability to become more resilient, that the people asking me the question are members of the global 1% and therefore some of the least at-risk people in human history, I'm not always sure I've convinced or comforted them. And it's not just non-experts. People who study climate change for a living seem similarly addicted to maximalist and inaccurate visions of climate catastrophe. Again, nobody wants good news. Climate noise. How serious can it be if it happens all the time? Isn't the definition of a serious event based on the fact that it's not an everyday occurrence? So asked the protagonist's teenage son, Heinrich, in Don DeLillo's acclaimed 1985 novel White Noise. Reading the line last summer in anticipation of Noah Baumbach's new Netflix adaptation, I couldn't help but think of the disconnect between our climate reality and our climate anxiety. In the book, Professor Jack Gladney and his local community are exposed to an airborne toxic event, a chemical spill called the niodine derivative, which causes a variety of mysterious symptoms, including the possibility of early death. Jack and his family's efforts to determine their level of exposure and its likely effects exacerbate their pre-existing fear of mortality and anxieties over living in the modern technical era. Long considered unfilmable because due to his indelible use of prose, the book became an instant capsule of the information age. Almost 4 decades later, it remains a surprisingly timeless meditation on what happens when we are inundated with indecipherable signal and noise from our relationship to novel technologies and our physical surroundings, and from the constant stream of information translated via media, family, friends, and foes. DeLillo claimed that ever present televised chemical spill in his inspiration. He was the time his was the time, after all, of chemical leaching in Love Canal, not far from me, the neighborhood near Niagara Falls, and the infamous Santa Barbara oil blowout. I have lived abroad for 3 years, DeLillo told a reporter after his book was published. And when I came back to this country in 1982, I began to notice something on television which I hadn't noticed before. This was the daily toxic spell. Perhaps because their frequency has declined since his writing, today's spills have been replaced by the daily televised extreme weather event. Like the scientific and technological anomalies in white noise, climate change manifests most charismatically in something that happens all the time: the weather. How serious can it be? This is the challenge for science communicators, one they have manipulated to great effect. Ask any climate activist. Bring up the subject of climate change at a cocktail party. Look at the headlines in an opening section of this essay. Turn on the news and you will hear that frequency and intensity of natural disasters has skyrocketed, that humanity is on the precipice of climate cataclysm. The floods in Pakistan, the hurricanes in the American South, wildfires so destructive they turn the sky bright orange. Scientists and science communicators have taken the weather and turned each extreme instance into evidence of the looming apocalypse. What makes this approach so powerful is that despite the statistical slipperiness, climate change is real. Anthropogenic carbon emissions are heating the atmosphere, affecting local weather, natural disasters, sea level, agricultural productivity, ecosystems, and animal life. The airborne toxic event is happening, but it occurs in the context of information overload, rapid social and technological change, and scientific propaganda. Sorting through all of this, the UN and the World Meteorological Organization climate reports, the overt and covert climate activist propaganda, the statistics translated for headlines, the outright climate denialism, and the very real lived experience of those suffering through natural disasters is the white noise in the age of climate change. Those of us who labor in the knowledge economy often fret about a different kind of white noise, the kind of misinformation to which we consider ourselves immune. Our proverbial uncles glued to Truth Social, our grandparents falling prey to Facebook scammers. But as DeLillo reminds us, even those of us who believe in science bathe in our own ocean of misinformation. Jack Gladney is a professor of Hitler studies, a discipline he helped found despite not speaking German, at a fictional school called College on the Hill. The most pointedly satirical feature in the story, the postmodern academic struggling from the ivory tower to swim through the flood of information he swept in and to comprehend the science and technology of his era. Even before the internet fractured our media landscape and became a wider recognition of elite overproduction, DeLillo recognized the plight of the hyper-educated consumer, bombarded, ultimately driven to psychosis from information. Today, the consequences of climate psychosis or anxiety are all around us. And these consequences are not limited to the soup throwers and the traffic blockers. Wealthy governments around the world put up their own roadblocks to energy infrastructure development in poor countries on the grounds that economic development is not worth the climate trade-off. While most people on Earth live on less than $10 a day, some of the wealthiest among us contemplate government programs of degrowth to keep material progress they enjoy out of the reach from those who have not yet achieved it. Messages of climate apocalypse have been cited by the growing number of young people who express an acute sense of climate anxiety, while some couples hesitate to have children for fear of dooming another carbon emitting consumer to a fiery future. Gee, I wonder if he's been to British Columbia and Nova Scotia and all the other places on fire.
No.
None of these
No.
are, right, Jennifer? None of these are
Exactly.
scientifically required responses in a world with greater material wealth, lower vulnerability to climate risk, and more widespread democratic freedoms than at, just ask Florida, than at any prior point in human history. And yet these responses have become common, particularly among those at the more elite levels of society. We have to ask ourselves whether our understanding of climate change is causing our climate anxiety, or whether there is a different place we should be pointing the finger. Indeed, the most obvious culprit behind rising climate anxiety is not the climate change itself, but rather the same information overload that DeLillo dramatized 4 decades ago. As one recent study found, climate anxiety is closely associated with higher generalized anxiety, and the strongest predictor of climate anxiety was climate information seeking behavior. After all, the machines of information manipulation and amplification have become measurably more intense than the weather has in recent decades. Why then would we think that climate anxiety is caused by the latter and not the former? The catastrophe cascade. In White Noise, Jack's wife, Babette, gets her hands on a black market pharmaceutical called Dilar, which is engineered to eliminate the patient's fear of death. It has the unfortunate side effect of making people insane. I could not distinguish words from things, Babette confesses after taking Dilar, so that if someone said speeding bullet, I would fall to the floor and take cover. Likewise, it has become difficult to distinguish climate metaphor for climate reality. When media figures and political leaders remind us that natural disasters are becoming radically more frequent and severe, even though the empirical data tells a different story, those trends, it can be all too easy to cast ourselves in their apocalyptic narrative. So even for those of us who sit in the comforts of modern wealth and infrastructure with a calming scientific summary of our relative climate safety, only a few clicks away when someone says climate catastrophe, we fall to the floor and take cover. This is the uncomfortable truth, the double-edged sword wielded by scientists. Given the relatively flat trend lines in extreme weather over the decades and the declining body counts, it is entirely thanks to scientists that we are conscious of climate risk in the first place. Without Svante Arrhenius' discovery of the greenhouse effect in the 1890s or atmospheric measurements from the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, or climate change expert James Hansen's congressional testimony in 1988, and the amplification of these findings by science communicators and the media, our collective understanding or even awareness of climate change must be greatly reduced. Like the connection between carcinogens and cancer, or mRNA vaccines and immune response, climate science fills in the gaps between our biological senses and our understanding of reality. Science makes something invisible into something visible, something inscrutable into something comprehensible. It can also make something banal into something terrifying, something metaphorical into something visceral. All that science was bound, even engineered, to have an impact on our psyches and on our very identities. As James Vincent puts it in his recent book, Beyond Measure, if we could not measure, then we could not observe the world around us. Measurement has not only made the world we live in, it has made us too. To be absolutely clear, In the view of this author, eating from the tree of wisdom was the right call. The advancement of science is worth the pitfalls. We would not be better off without Arrhenius's discovery or without Hansen's testimony, even if one can imagine a better world with similar climate impacts but less climate anxiety. But it's undeniable that a cascade of social sorting effects, professional imperatives, and media biases has compounded to create climate science and communication apparatuses that stoke our anxiety instead of moderating it. The type of individual who self selects into climate science, activism, advocacy, or journalism is almost definitely more concerned about climate change than the average person. Climate scholarship indexes for strong correlations between carbon emissions and real world outcomes, since null results and non correlations are not worth publishing. Leading researchers utilize implausible worst case scenarios and emphasize negative impacts, often with the express intent of motivating political action. University and mainstream media outlets take even this biased science and strip out complexity and nuance for headlines and simplistic quotations. Climate activists with ideological agendas, whether a Green New Deal or a carbon tax or geoengineering or whatever, accentuate the positives of action and exaggerate the perils of inaction, the way any good organizer does. And visualizing something as gradual and complex as climate change almost necessarily demands images of hurricanes, floods, and storms. The cascade pushes all towards abstract catastrophism, division, and anxiety. Resisting the push requires constant vigilance, a demanding prescription when the information ecosystem is the very climate itself. We are all Californians. This is where California comes in, remarks Jack's colleague Alphonse in the novel. Mudslides, brush fires, coastal erosion, earthquakes, mass killings, etc. We can relax and enjoy these disasters because in our hearts we feel that California deserves whatever it gets. Californians invented the concept of lifestyle. This alone warrants their doom. In the age of climate change, we are all Californians. Climate scientists and social scientists have constructed elaborate analysis connecting consumers' lifestyle carbon emissions to all manner of disaster. Our carbon emissions are obviously responsible for the wildfires in Australia and the floods in Pakistan. But carbon emissions are also behind the Syrian civil war and, obliquely, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which, according to the narrative, has more to do with our extractivist addiction to fossil fuels than with Vladimir Putin's ideological authoritarianism. They are implicated in burglary and assault and hate speech. The sins of our carbon emissions even transcend space and time. A 2009 analysis widely cited in the activist circles concludes that the decision to have a child adds about 9,441 metric tons of carbon dioxide to the carbon legacy of an average female, which is 5.7 times her lifetime emissions. We are just not responsible for our own emissions, but the emissions of all our descendants combined and all the hypothesized catastrophic climate impacts of those emissions. Precisely, though, the symbol of natural disasters, Delilio anticipated exactly how the climate discourse would come to channel the white noise phenomenon into an eschatological, moralistic narrative. With the constant reminder of our own carbon footprint, we feel in our hearts that we deserve whatever climate impacts we get, up to and including the end of the world. It's maddening in its simplicity. While societies have always considered excess consumption a vice, by distilling that consumption down to the most fundamental unit of our existence, carbon, We have conceptualized both our sinfulness and our destructiveness in the most totalizing way imaginable. Unlike nylon D or dilar, the carbonic essence of our sin is not synthetic or rare. It is the definition of organic and one of the most abundant elements on earth. It is no longer merely that the chaos of socially produced information drives us insane. It is the physical world. It is that physical world and physical science bombarded us constantly with specific evidence of our overwhelming personal guilt. Our lifestyle alone warrants our doom. Climate science communicators have offered no obvious cures for omnipresent anxiety. Instead, the predominant response has been to revel in it. Climate anxiety is not in itself a problem, says psychologist and climate anxiety researcher Britt Ray in an interview published in Smithsonian Magazine under the headline, "Your crushing anxiety about climate crisis is normal. The first step is to always validate the fear." This is the only acceptable conclusion for a community that has described the problem in such consistently apocalyptic terms. After all, if our anxiety is not valid, then what does that say about the science that produced it? And it need not be this way. The media reports the scientific papers and the activist slogans and the pop therapy sessions could encapsulate climate change not as exaggerated millenarian punishment for devious behavior, but as a manageable if serious hazard created by human activity. Which of the two framings, after all, sounds more scientific to you? As someone whose vocation is to advance decarbonization and climate adaptation, I can say for my part that embracing the most empirical understanding of climate science is energizing, even liberating. But I'll concede that inculcating this embrace elsewhere, reducing the social and professional rewards offered by catastrophism, is easier said than done. Information overload is a hazard of any large, curious, educated, technological, and fractured society. And our institutions may not be able to evolve to produce and amplify this information in a more responsible way. In the meantime, it's up to each of us whether we let the white noise drive us insane. Okay, so let's have a
Wow.
little conversation before we move on about this. Okay. First of
Hmm.
all, Jennifer, I would love to get your take on this dude's work or this article
I mean,
specifically. I mean, has he watched our channel?
uh, I don't think so. But he has his point of view. I don't really subscribe to his point of view at all. I think it's not correct. I think we are in abrupt climate change, and I think the climate catastrophe is on an exponential scale, and I think it's increasing
Yeah.
quickly. And I don't think that it's just a matter of the fact that the news is catching the disasters. It's not a matter of perception.
No.
So, one thing I found really interesting, because I've been looking for this stat for a long time, and it had
Okay.
to do with your carbon legacy as a woman. Have you ever thought of this? 10,000 metric tons per child. That's the carbon legacy of having a child.
Mm.
So, each child you have, it's 10,000 metric tons in your climate carbon legacies. That's very interesting,
Wait
isn't
till
it?
I tell Dawn. Wait till I tell her
Yeah.
you cost the planet all these tons of carbon.
Because and that's 5 times a woman's own carbon emissions
Yep.
during her lifetime, right?
Yep.
Because your children may have children, those children may have children. That whole
Mm-hmm.
thing is a carbon legacy. And I hadn't really ever thought of the term carbon legacy. So
No.
that part, I thought it was a well written article, I have to say.
Mm-hmm. It
It
was.
was a
That it
very,
was.
very well written article. I think it was very serving of his views, and I don't know. What did you think, Sandy?
Well, there were okay, I'll go down to a few things. I was a little snarky maybe because I think that it sounds to me like he almost could be with the Heartland Institutes. I mean, clearly does not like science communicators now.
Yeah,
I think he has some anger issues, possibly.
could be, could be.
Yeah, I just felt that. Guys out there, if you have anything, I will click you later on about this article. But Nadia said he's lying about the catastrophism in the media. Yeah, it's only certain media, but it certainly isn't. It certainly is not. You know,
There were so many statements in there. It had me going, huh?
right?
What? What? And it's like you have to really wrap your head around where he's going. But you
Well, where
know,
is he going? We're not doomed. Technology will save us, pretty much.
yeah,
I mean, that's where he's going. He's an eco
yeah.
modernist. And the eco modernists, like Carl, who comes on our channel every now and then, they do think that nuclear and all of this happy hooey is definitely going to, you know, save us. It's going to
Well,
save us.
good. I'm relieved, really,
I'm
Sandy, because
relieved, right?
I'm relieved. I'm happy we're not going to hell in a handbasket. I'm happy that the wheels aren't coming off the little trailer. I'm happy that the that light that we see at the end of the tunnel is not the approach of an oncoming train. Um, you know, I'm relieved because I've been spending way too much of my life over the last decade trying to tell people that we are so fucked. But you know what? We're not. It's
No,
clear. It's
no.
clear.
And we just got it from Alex. Alex Trebek. Nope, Trembath, sorry. But Jen, when I think about
What?
all this and all that we've gone through and, having this
Yeah.
conversation with you, I just don't feel like, based on all of this information we do see, that this is catastrophism. I don't feel that way at all. I feel like we are definitely on the right track and it's very sad. And while we
It
are
is very
not
sad.
going to go extinct in 2026 that I know of, I
Mhm.
don't think we're going to last a species to the end of to 2100. And so many things have been changed to 2050. And and if the United Nations is doing this and saying the things they're saying, so he's putting down the United Nations and all of the people and all of the scientists and all of those that are invested in making changes in their countries so that people don't suffer and don't die. He's minimizing all of these people.
Mhm. Yes.
It sounded like that to me. I mean, it did. What do you guys think? You know?
Yeah, do we have some comments that we
Well,
can put
let's
up
see.
here?
Before we move on, that's why we're only doing two articles today. So let's see what you guys up here. Artificial
Let's see.
Morphous Man says corporate media loves to report climate disasters, but report on the um, causes and who's responsible. Yeah, well, that's true. They're not always talking about, the Koch brothers or the fossil fuel companies. You're right there.
So, kind of along the same line, have you seen this whole thing about AI lately and how AI is going to cause human extinction and it's either going to be AI or a pandemic? And I've been listening to all this stuff,
Yeah,
and I'm like, it's
really.
very interesting. It's very interesting. But what's the elephant in the room? I mean, guys, wake up and smell the coffee. It's right in front of your face. It's when you go outside, go to the park, you can see it everywhere. It's climate change. Climate change is only going to get worse. And once the Arctic sea ice melts, and it's getting thinner every year, and we don't know exactly what year that's going to be, what's more important is the trend. But it all comes back to the fact that the Arctic sea ice is the air conditioner for this planet, and we're already heating up very quickly. Is
Yeah,
it
we are.
exponential? I don't know. The carbon emissions is certainly exponential.
Hmm.
It's good to know that heat is a lagging indicator. What that means is that the carbon emissions go up first and the heat catches up. And then, things happen after that. But it's like right before your eyes. But people are so keen to say, well, it's AI is going to cause human extinction because it's going to confuse us all, and we're all going to like not know what's real and blow ourselves up or something. I haven't quite got it yet. But
I
no, it's
haven't.
climate change. It's climate change. It's right
That
here, right now.
and
It's the carbon
biological
emissions.
degradation. That and ruining the planet for building shopping malls and destroying the planet so that we can have our avocados and coconut oil and palm oil in our products. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. Climate change is the icing, but we're destroying everything. I mean, Jennifer, when
Hmm.
you go, I don't know where you when and you're in Boulder, you go around. Are there building? Is there building going on? Is
Oh
there
yeah.
always? Yeah, always, right? And every
Oh yeah.
time I go to Buffalo, there's something new, some new strip mall, something's for rent, but these things are empty and then they're not empty. It's like insane in my opinion. And so there's much more than just, the changing climate. We're destroying we're
Hmm.
destroying every bit of the earth
Yes, we are a virus.
exponentially.
We are a virus on the crust of this earth, and I feel like one day Gaia's just going to shrug us off and roast us alive. I mean, we kind of deserve what we get. We've been such a horrendous species, not much to recommend.
Yeah, it's well. Let's see what is okay. AI is a distraction for tech bros to hide the fact that NFTs were taken out of the back room and disappeared. I love our people. Okay, Gary. The first article makes an old denialist assertion that actual scientists are motivated by greed or a need for political power, an accusation never proven and stated as fact. Thank you, Gary. I don't even know where the goddamn up here it is. Thank you, Gary. I should hear it now. Yay! Gary, you're wonderful. Thanks, Gare.
Yay,
That was a good
Gary!
one because that's kind of where I was reaching to go with this article. Unpack some of the stuff. So, yeah, that was very cool. So, Bill, what does Bill say? Technology got us to where we are, facing the abyss. Yeah, it's quite a conundrum. So, I think you think we've done enough with good old Alex.
Mhm.
All right. So, guys, we do have an intermission, and we're going to play that now because the next article is a long one. And so I want you guys to hang on. I have been fiddling around with my electronics, so let's hope I get this right. Have fun listening.
It's 2050 and the world as we knew it ended. It's 2050 and the world as we knew it ended. It's 2050 and the world as we knew it ended. Global food supply was hit by a series of climate change-induced droughts. People ran out of water, which caused riots in every major city. Looting, destruction, collapse. This guy saw it coming. And so we're taking shelter in a community he built here back in the 2020s.
Quicker than expected. It's very hard to think about these things as possible realities when everything is still sort of intact, although we're seeing apocalyptic events wherever we look from a climate perspective.
No, no, nothing is ever over. The ontological fallacy of expecting a light at the end of the tunnel. Well, that's what the preacher sells. Same as a shrink.
Climate change anxiety, is that a thing that you could see when you're, working with a patient?
Yes, it's not a diagnosis, and I think it's important to distinguish between climate change anxiety as something that's really widespread. Research shows that 3/4 of young people are reporting worry about climate change, and not all of them have a mental health disorder.
We are already seeing the Greenland ice sheet collapse. We are already seeing coral reef die-offs, and we are already seeing ocean currents being altered, the northern forest, the high forest changing. These kind of enormous climatic events, and add to that the fires, the heat waves, the floodings, etc., are real. You can't deny that. And so whether one wishes to call it doomerism or whether one wishes to call it a call to action and therefore take action, this is really up to us as humanity.
Enclosure. Where the fuck those two fucking empty jars to hold this shitstorm like nothing's ever fulfilled.
Climate change anxiety, I think, is an appropriate and normal response to what is going on our Earth, on our globe, and that our goal isn't to tell people, you know what, there's no issue here, we just need to teach you some breathing skills and then you will feel okay. The goal is to acknowledge this is a real issue.
So being worried is legitimate.
Essentially, collapse of civilization and the extinction of a lot of species, possibly our own, is inevitable in the near term. And it is positive because it means we can release so many of the games, so many of the trivialities, those things that are irrelevant in life, the battles we fight with religions or political philosophies, or over whether we should be a vegan or drive a Hummer. And what it replaces that with is the sense that we can turn our own lives into a pillar of service, a pillar of kindness, and do all the things that sort of are the best self that we can bring to the table.
It is understood that human psychology is averse to uncertainty, and it seeks evidence that affirms existing worldviews. The possibility of collapse and extinction has been apparent since the invention of the hydrogen bomb in the 50s. It is clear that surviving this century will require humanity to abandon political, economic, and even biological agendas, which have been established for millennia. This is not likely.
2024 at the latest is what they're saying. And they're saying that it could very well be that by 2035 we might be in that BOE plus 10 situation.
Lord.
Which is because, don't forget, you have, the sea ice in the Arctic, you have Antarctica. So you got these two massive things of ice having high albedo, right? Reflects a lot of the heat energy back into space. Well, now we're losing the albedo from the Arctic side of things. So now, instead of that sun energy being reflected back into space, the open water absorbs it. And that just heats up everything. Then you have latent heat energy, which is why the air stays warmer. Also, this is why the sea ice is freezing later in the year, because the water's still above freezing. And don't forget, to freeze seawater, you have to go below 0 degrees C because of freezing point depression due to the salinity content.
We're just a bundle of good news today.
No, this is the stark reality.
Everything is so fucked up. Everything is so fucked up.
Ooh, I hope you enjoyed that one, Jennifer.
Wow.
I took some blast from the past.
That was really blast from the past.
Yeah, it was blast from the past. Yeah, I definitely. It was pre. For me, it was pre-COVID, pre-divorce, pre 40 pounds.
Pre a lot of things, right?
Yeah, pre a lot of things.
Pre more life.
Yeah, but it seems like, when you were talking about in that actual clip that I took out, and you were talking about things that were exacerbating, and they still are. and maybe it's not just that they're exacerbating. It's just, or they're happening more frequently. It's the ferocity of some of these storms.
And it's good to take on board the trend. Like, we all have different opinions about how long is this all going to take. In the end, I don't think, I mean, of course it matters to our own personal lives, but in the end, I don't think it really matters because it's all happening in the course of a single human lifetime. The worst extinction, the highest rate of increase of carbon emissions in the planet,
Mm-hmm.
right, ever in the last 4.5 billion years is happening now during our lifetime. And how it will play out, we don't know exactly how fast it'll play out, but it's the trend to understand.
I'm
And it's
telling you.
also to understand the irrevocable nature of the trend and also the bigness. It's just so big.
Wow.
So there we are. We're just a bundle of good news, guys.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, why don't we now play the intro to our next section?
Oh,
Let me see if I
yes.
can get my little push buttons right. Well, here we go. Take it away, Jennifer.
All right, guys, let's go.
Fitting
Special from
intro
Umair
to
Hay.
Umair. Yeah.
Life during the age of extinction and how it'll change. What it's going to feel like as the planet turns against us. In the age we've entered, the age of extinction, what is life going to be like? One way to think about it is what I've begun to call in my head World War P. It's not going to seem as if the planet is at war with us. It's going to seem as if the planet is at war with us. Human beings took their first steps about 300,000 years ago. And for that time, by and large, the planet has been hospitable to us. It's presented us with bounty after bounty, treasure after treasure. Stories abound of how rich in life, for example, North America was when the settlers arrived. Life for the human species so far, in this first chapter of its journey, has been easy. That's not to say that human beings haven't had their struggles and strife. Certainly they have. But what confronts us now is like nothing that has ever come before in human history, all 300,000 years of it. And certainly nothing remotely like what it was 5,000 years civilization has known. A planet hostile to human existence. What do I mean by that? I'm not predicting any of the above. You can see it beginning to happen. From shockingly high levels of heat in the Indian subcontinent to the way the extreme weather and wildfires have become the new normal. All of these are the mere beginnings of what is going to happen over the next decade or three. The planet is going to become hostile to us. And we have never, ever experienced anything like this before. Already the seasons are changing. Do you remember how they were not so long ago? When I was a child, just a few decades ago, spring was delicate, summer was refreshing, autumn was bracing, and winter was brisk. But now, what we once thought of seasons have already begun to transform. Now summer is mega fire season. Autumn and spring are mega flood season. And winter is mega storm season. And while that might seem relatively innocuous now, we humans are eminently bad at imagining just how fast change really adds up. There's no going back. Imagine how much more intense all of these phenomena and seasons will be just a decade from now. Two, the rate of change is not linear. We didn't really have mega fires or mega floods even 2 decades ago. Now, they're an increasing regularity. So imagine then entire seasons where they're the norm. What does that mean? It means the planet is changing. Its biogeography is altering permanently. Megafire season is the emergence of fire belts ringing in the planet. Mega flood season, that flood belts. Mega storms, replete with tornadoes and so forth, again create whole new zones. All of these begins to shrink habitable human landmass. And, of course, the landmass available to us for our basic civilizational systems, food, air, energy, medicine, manufacturing, and so forth. We humans are not very good at seeing change if it isn't immediate. Our planet is now transforming season by season into a different one. That change is happening in an eye blink of geological time. But we humans, with our mayfly lives, barely register it at times. And yet, at the end of this process of transformation arrives a different planet, one that's not nearly so friendly to human life, to human civilization, but one made of fire, flood, storm, and plague. It almost sounds biblical, and that's how far back in humanity's collective consciousness we have to reach to really register the almost mythological scale of what is upon us. This planet, our planet, is now transforming over decades from one we've known for 300,000 years to a different one. From one innocently offering us an abundance of riches and resources to choose from, which we're accustomed to one which will feel like it is actively trying to wipe us out. Humanity isn't really prepared for all that. There is nothing in humanity's experience which can prepare us for that. We've grown up for generation after generation with a certain way of feeling about the planet. It's our friend, our provider, our parent. Even if we take it for granted and abuse it and don't often stop to think about the unconscious image of it, but a planet that's our enemy, that's our foe, we have never, in 300,000 years, really thought about our home that way because it never has been that way. Think for a moment about how we really think about the planet and have done. The ancients would say their prayers and make their offerings to the gods and the seas or the skies, hoping to avert catastrophe. Today, we still employ that frame. Catastrophe means something abnormal, something out of the ordinary, an extreme event. And yet, exactly such events are becoming normal. What do you think when placating the gods doesn't work, when catastrophe becomes everyday experience? We aren't really grasping the scale of this change at all yet. It's going to feel like the planet is trying to wipe us out, like it's throwing everything it's got at us, from lightning to thunder to tsunamis to fires to pandemics and beyond. They won't just strike season after season. They're already doing that. They'll intensify until they're more or less all there is. The world, as we know it, will be inverted. For most of us, for most of our progeny, A nice day will be profoundly unusual event. A deadly one will be the norm. What does it feel like to live on a planet that's hostile to your existence? We humans aren't good at that either. Dealing with hostility with wisdom through cooperation and investment and understanding. Instead, we tend to react with rage, fear, and violence. Our primate brain takes over. It seeks safety in hierarchy, demands everything from sacrifice to retaliation to escalation. It will feel like a war, a new kind of war, a war between us and a hostile planet. I hesitate to say any of this because right now, the way that we think about all of this is still innocent, idealistic, and a little bit perhaps naive. We talk about climate change and plans, mitigation, so forth. But when it feels like the planet's trying to kill us, human beings will react in the way they tend to do when they're threatened, with anger, fear, and violence. All of today's language and thinking will be outmoded fast. The stakes will be very, very different shortly. The idea won't be anymore that we're trying to deal with a benign presence whose climate is changing. Instead, human societies are more likely to react with explosion of rage, hostility, and brutality. The feeling of war against the planet will rise, and that too is something new. Another way to think about that, because it's quite an abstract concept, is to make it a bit more real. Consider it this way. Who's going to prevent a city, say, like Manhattan or London, from simply drowning? Lower Manhattan, you can practically already feel the water squelching through the asphalt. Right about now, there's no answer to that question because nobody has a plan. And that's exactly the point. The entire way we are thinking about all of this so far is that we are not really thinking about it at all. When it comes time to begin to save human civilization, what's left of it, from a hostile planet, which feels now like it's trying to wipe us out, so too will we have to resort to mega-scale engineering, like building seawalls around our great cities in desperate, last-ditch attempt to stop them drowning, or like irrigating our few fertile fields with what water's left, or carefully rationing that same water and the food grown from it, or quickly developing a vaccine against the latest pandemic. Who's capable of all that? Under the auspices does it fall? Corporations can't do that job, sorry. The only actor in society who's really capable of doing any of that is the military. This job of fighting a war for human civilization against a planet trying to wipe it out will naturally fall to the military, which is the only party in society remotely capable of mobilizing 1 million people in the blink of an eye to build seawalls or dams or put out mega fires, to do mega scale engineering as fast as possible, to fix cracks in our breaking, shattered systems. The military will have to take over the job of trying to desperately save what's left of civilization because, well, we've put it off too long already now, and it does look like we're even doing anything to stop what's imminent. Of course not. Every year the temperature rises. Nobody believes the absurd, if noble climate pledges and so forth, that this will all stop at 2 degrees, or that we'll hit net zero, or what have you. It's not going to happen. We all know it. I discuss here what would have to happen for that to happen, which is our investment rate suddenly doubling or tripling as civilization, trillions invested in the largest wave in human history. There's no sign of that, and there won't be until it's too late. What's probably going to happen at this point is that humanity, at least portions of it, will, in a desperate scramble, try to save whatever they can from a planet that's now trying to wipe them out. Means something like this. Rich nations will mobilize whatever resources they have to defend their wealthiest cities, and then, if anything's left, maybe try and provide for people. That means things like seawalls around Manhattan or San Francisco or Washington, D.C. or London. In America, probably means that much of the country simply runs out of resources, from water to medicine to energy, after a protracted struggle over who gets what, after which time the answer is nobody. Poor nations will do whatever they can, which is probably not much. What can India or Pakistan really do? The temperature's hitting 60 degrees. The rivers have run dry, and the fields, which feed 2 billion, are scorched and parched. They don't have enough electricity or food or water now. Then one shudders to think. Poor nations will simply be caught in the jaws of the trap of a dying planet. In both poor and rich nations, though, the consequences of living on a dying planet are sociopolitically one and the same. Military control takes over. Who else can coordinate things like rationing and enforcing strict limits on resource usage? Who else can make last-ditch effort to keep shattered systems alive for one more decade by sending 100,000 people to patch things up here and there, or fight a fire here and take the last of the water reservoir there? Only really the military can. And for the next few generations, I think their defining experience will be a new kind of war. A war for what's left of civilization against a dying planet. It's not a war in the usual sense. It's not about slaughter per se, but about survival, about keeping the vital systems of food, water, clean air, medicine, basic supplies alive. For more than 5 years, then 2, then 1 more, then 6 months more, then 3 months, and so on. Imagine the Herculean effort it all takes. It takes millions of people to do those things, to really try and fight off a dying planet and rescue what's left of a civilization. Of course, that war itself will be marred by smaller ones, resource conflicts, like Russia's bloody and brutal war on Ukraine, which is about controlling the world's food and energy supplies. This war will have several fronts: human versus planet, human against human, human against virus. COVID gave us a small taste, too, of what the coming age feels like. We're all part of the fight, whether we like it or not. Sadly, COVID, too, teaches us that many will prefer to simply give up or act against the common good. Humans have an Achilles heel: cooperation. We are not capable of much of it at the best of times, and here come the worst of times. I don't like the frame or word war. The wise course of action, obviously, would be for us to begin the greatest wave of investment in human history and to act and to prevent what parts of the event we can now: extinction. Instead, our broken systems ensure that money and resources that could be done to end up in the hands of toxic idiots with garbage brains and voids of consciousness. The better approach would be to cooperate with the planet, Now, every forest, river, ocean species, so that all can have a chance of survival. But we humans can't even manage to sort out our own little difference at tribal levels. So, what hope do we really have of uniting to save much of anything bigger? A desperate war will therefore be waged, a last ditch attempt by a civilization suddenly struck by what has never happened in human history before: extinction. Our civilization will fight to save itself, but that fight will come far, far too late. World War P, our coming war against the planet for survival of us, is unwinnable. The planet will prevail. We human beings have grown a little arrogant. Hubris touches too many of us. We imagine that we are mightier than the soil or the thunder. No such thing is true. To the planet, we're barely specks of mud. Our civilization has no chance of enduring the planet of fire belts and flood belts and plague belts, where basics like food and water and air have become luxuries. One which is profoundly, endlessly hostile to human life in unrelenting, omnipresent ways. Zero chance. On such a planet, our systems will not work. Think of how wasteful they already are. Think of how they reward cunning and violence and brutality, not generosity, reciprocity, and fairness. Consider how the hierarchies which still organize every last aspect of our lives are basically still those of primates and elevate the most brutable, insatiable, and stupid among us, to whom the rest of us cower and obey. Or imagine how our systems shower the most wealth and power on the most exploitive of us all. Such systems will not work on a planet hostile to human life for the simple reason that such systems are hostile to human life. We are going to need systems instead which nourish and nurture and protect life, not just human, but of all kinds. Because, of course, our lives only exist in a delicate and fragile web of others to begin with. Our civilization has zero chance of going on existing on a planet hostile to human life. Parts of it, of course, are to be learned from. Science, art, literature, music, all forms of truth which cross the oceans of deep time, all expressions which transcend the brutality and violence and stupidity which seems to permeate us still. I said that this was the first chapter of humanity's story. I meant it. In the way I've tried to describe above. For 300,000 years, human beings have survived through one thing alone. It came to dominate the planet through one value and one act above all: violence. But the chapter of human history, which is about the triumph of violence, is now at an end. Because no matter how much violence we do, or will ever be able to do, it will never be able to defeat, restore, heal, or save a dying planet. We are now at a turning point in human history. Either we transcend violence or we join the event too. The event we ourselves have created. Extinction. Extinction is here. The question is whether we understand the price of violence, its absolute limits, at long, long last. Violence could get us this far. Apes dominating a planet, killing off their nearest cousins, exploiting all the rest. But it cannot get us any further. Now, ever, period. Now we learn to grow up, to mature into grace, courage, wisdom, compassion, empathy, truth, goodness, or extinction. Laughing at our hubris comes for us too. That choice and whether we can make it at all, or whether all we are is selfish, screeching primates, is what will shape human history forevermore. Umair Haig, May 2023. Umair.
That it was long. It wasn't as in depth as some of his stuff, but we got some interesting comments. And
Oh, yeah?
yeah, somebody said Umair needs his own tank. But Gary said, I think Umair could be more direct. Militaries will take care of themselves. AI and other ecocidal machines will wreak havoc. We cannot control a system designed only to commodify and devour us. Yeah, pretty good. Thank you. Thank you. So what'd you think, Jen, as you were reading it?
No, I mean, it choked me up. I thought it was profound. I thought it was actually very touching and very direct and very in depth. I think it didn't pull any punches. I think he's going there more and more. There's no question in my mind what he thinks. It's
Yeah,
pretty
of
clear.
course.
And I kind of echo his sentiments, to be honest. I really do. And
I
I
know
kind
he's
of
your
wonder
favorite.
that too. It's like, are we just, overgrown simians, destined to be brutal and hateful and violent? Do we have a higher nature that can triumph in the age of extinction? And that's going to be what we're going to see soon.
Well, my own personal experience with certain individuals just in the social media sphere, no. But that's the social media sphere. So, okay, let me see. Okay, Rollins switch. Plagues, super volcanoes, glaciations, flood, famine, disease, predators, war, enslavement, comet strikes. Been easy so far. All of the above, my friend. All of the above.
Oh my
Been
God.
easy so far.
Really?
Okay, and early love. Hi, early love. Excuse me, but does my reservation to the end of the world include free parking? Leave it to early love. Yeah, that was good. That was good. So, how you guys doing out there? Joe. Oh, what's the matter, Joe? Joe said, I'm so angry about Australia signing a deal with the Pentagon for mining the minerals the military will need. For what? To kill us all. Yeah, I'm with you, Joe.
I get it.
That seems like the militaries in all of the countries are just, crazy. In the high singing way, Marianne Williamson is ready to lead the world into a new consciousness of compassion, wisdom, and maturity. Oh, it's beautiful. But, this is America. Marianne Williams is, I love what she says, but it's not going to happen. I'm sorry. We are not, and many countries are not touchy-feely. They don't want to feel good. There's no
Yeah, I don't think the world's really ready for Marianne Williamson at large. Some people are, and she has quite a following and community, but is the world at large really ready to make a jump in consciousness to higher light and
no,
love?
and so many people think that that's nutty and crazy. You think about all the people going to work every day in their jobs. They're not going to be sitting there saying, well, we're going to go and, meditate, blah, blah, blah. I mean, not that she's saying just that. She's got policies. She's got many things. not environmental. As part of the Life Society, it's so painful when my neighbors talk about life but vote for death and continuing increasing wealth inequality, which is a huge issue. Huge issue, the wealth inequality on this planet. And that's a big problem. Donald's earlier was we all of us here now at this show, we know that we are not overlooking or talking and taking anything for granted, but I cannot wallow in this information that we already understand. Nobody is asking you to wallow once a week, twice a week. We talk about it, we show you. We went the full gamut tonight. We went from one spectrum to the other. And that was on purpose. So,
Indeed.
yeah.
Indeed. Somebody wants to say hello.
Hello. Do I have a meow? I don't even know. Oh, there. Hi, Meowie. Hi. Okay, well, let's see what he says. Book Hermit. Wealth inequality is all that's saving us. Evenly distributed, we'd have destroyed almost everything by now. Well, you might have a point there. You'd have to think about that that's harsh, but I think we're talking about wealth and maybe wealth inequality in the United States. We Americans cannot do anything about anything in any other country. We have only control, and the only control we have is either to vote or get involved in local politics, or go to meetings, go to town board meetings, school board meetings. Those are the kinds of things, because it's local, babe. Mm-hmm. It's local. It is local. Andre said you had a big kitty.
Oh, yes. She's huge. She's like, she's a Manx. She doesn't have a tail. And she is about 16 pounds, I think.
Oh, she's a big cat.
She's a big girl,
big
yeah.
Cat. So,
Yeah.
Hi, Allison. How about the pipeline approval that just got passed in the debt ceiling? Yep, it's bullshit. We don't like it. Yeah, just it'll destroy it. Yep, we're watching this happen, and and we can't, and people can't even protest because they're going to get arrested, or they want to get arrested, or they don't want to get arrested. I don't know, but there's just too many. Like, I was going to show you the Guardian articles, but I decided, there's just so much going on, so much news, so much information.
Mm-hmm.
But
I feel very overcome by so much information. I feel my little head is going to pop.
Sometimes.
It's too much for me to take on board, even moi.
God says we're not complacent. No, we're not complacent. I don't think so. I'm not.
Well, I think what's most important is we're building community. There's nothing that we can do individually or collectively to stop this catastrophe that's underway, but we can acknowledge it and share our thoughts together, and I think that's a comfort.
Yes. And we're happy that you're here. And thank you very much. Yes, Scott says now they're arresting people who provide bail money to protesters. I saw that today. Oh my God. We live in a crazy time. I mean, every time, every era, everything is always seems worse than the next. But yet so many people say we're living in the best of times because we have so much at our fingertips.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows? Is that really the best? And Andre said, well said, Jennifer. And at that, I think we are going to say goodnight.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. We will see you next Friday. I'll have a show on Tuesday. And let me see if I can get this going and say good night.